Well, it's 1902, so I am going to crack on. As I just said, if everybody can just turn off cameras and microphones for us, save the bandwidth and the rest for the speech. So hello everyone, and welcome back to the fifth in our series of exclusive online talks for the Kent Archaeological Society. I hope you are all fully immersed in the winter feels. It's starting to get a bit chillier. I don't know how many have got their Christmas decorations up yet. Maybe still a bit early. See, Simon hasn't got his up yet.
Not yet.
Well, soon though. As ever, we hope tonight will go without any technical issues, but please do bear with us. Our hero Jacob is here, hiding in the background as ever, to rescue us as he so often does, should anything go wrong. If you're not currently a member of the Kent Archaeological Society, please do think about joining us. It works out at only about £3.30 a month, and for that you'll receive a copy of our yearly journal, Archaeologia Cantiana, full of the most current historical and archaeological research in the county. You'll also receive our biannual magazine, regular newsletters, exclusive access to our collections, conferences and selected events, opportunities to get involved in excavations and research projects, and you will help allow us to continue putting out content such as these online talks. We can do outreach in schools, community groups and seminars, and we really hope we are bringing the benefits of Kent history and heritage to everybody. Check the website for details on how you can sign up to be a member or just get involved. So, housekeeping. The talk today with Simon Elliot will last about an hour, after which there'll be time for questions if you have any. Please keep yourselves on mute with your cameras off throughout so that we can hear our speaker clearly. During the questions and answers, you can either use the raise hand feature and we will unmute you when it's your turn to ask your question, or if you would prefer, you can type your question in the chat box and I will read it out for you. I hope it goes without saying, but please be courteous and polite to our speaker and to each other. We will be recording the session and it may be posted to our video channels in the future, but no personal data will be shared. And if you ask any question but would prefer it not to be published, just send us an email saying so and we'll make sure that happens. Make sure it doesn't go out. So, on to our speaker. Dr. Simon Elliot is a historian, archaeologist, author and broadcaster. He has an MA in archaeology from UCL, an MA in war studies in KCL, and a PhD from the University of Kent in classics and archaeology, where he is an honorary research fellow. He has written and published a library worth of fantastic books and articles, exploring many aspects of Roman and classical world history. Simon completed 2 terms as a trustee for the Council of British Archaeology, is an ambassador for the Museum of London Archaeology, and a fellow of the Society of Antiquaries. Simon has and continues to appear in multiple fantastic TV shows, radio, podcasts, and documentaries, including the pilot for the Great British Dig, which is where I first had the pleasure of meeting him. He's also a tour guide for a range of historical adventures worldwide. You can find details of all Simon's publications, tours, and broadcasts on his website, simonelliot20.com, which we will add a link to in the chat, Jacob, if you are able to do that for me. Simon has been involved in countless significant archaeological projects across our county, assisting the Society in many of our landmark excavations. He's a valued and important trustee here at the Society and has really helped to boost our recent projects and spread the word about what we do. In other pursuits, Simon is also a keen gamer, adventurer, collector, and perhaps the coolest bandana wearer since Hulk Hogan.
Should be wearing one.
Simon, thank you for joining us.
Pleasure.
The floor, my friend, is yours.
Okay, let's get the technology working. By the way, you should do my PR, mate. That right, share. The host isn't allowing shares. Jacob, let me share. Got it. Right, I'm assuming Craig just messaged me, just say that you can see the screen and then I'll get going. Yep, all good. Excellent. Good evening, everybody. My name is Dr. Simon Elliot. It's my absolute pleasure to be talking to you through the Kent Archaeological Society about a subject very close to my own heart, which is the great warrior emperor Septimius Severus, who was one of the greatest Roman emperors, but about who very few people know much detail until I started writing about him. So I've got a book out already on Severus, Septimius Severus in Scotland, which was published in 2017 through Greenhill. I've got a very big book coming out next year called The African Emperor through Icon Books, which is a full biography. So next year I have a full biography. And the reason why it's going to be very relevant over the next few weeks is the movie Gladiator 2 started today. It was launched today. And Gladiator 2 set in the Severan period, where the two baddies, the protagonists, the new Commoduses, are Caracalla and Geta, who are Severus's sons. So Severus and the Severans are going to be in the limelight over the next 6 months. So I shall begin. Firstly, there is Septimius Severus. This is a very famous Severan tondo, which is a contemporary portrait painted like a fine painting from Egypt, probably the size of a dinner plate, painted around AD 201, 202, while Severus was in Egypt. So Severus would have seen this, and this is how he viewed himself. He's very dark-skinned, North African, as I'm going to explain in a minute. That's his wife, Julia Domna, the love of his life. That son below him is Caracalla, and the one with the face scrubbed off is Geta, who Caracalla murdered or had murdered within a year of Severus dying, and then did a memorial damnatio on him. A very effective one, because the face of Geta has been removed from nearly every representation across the Roman Empire. So they're the Severans, and that is Septimius Severus, as he would have seen himself personally, because he saw this and would have commissioned it. And it's now in the Alters Museum in Berlin, which is very, very worth a visit if you get a chance. So today I'm going to talk briefly, I'll give you an introduction. And in the introduction, I'm going to very briefly talk about Severus, so a few key top lines. And then I'm going to talk about the sources which we have for his life, which are actually pretty detailed, actually. And then I'm going to give you a quick run through Britain in the later 2nd century AD to build up to the Severan campaigns at the beginning of the 3rd century AD, when he attempted at the very end of his life to conquer what we now call Scotland, the far north of Britain. I'll then give you a proper biography of Severus and talk about Severan Rome. So a lot of people don't realize that when you go around Rome today, about a third of antique Rome, ancient Rome, is Severan, and I'll explain all the various buildings. I've just come back from leading a tour in Rome, so I'm really, really nailed on for you. I'm then going to talk about the Severan military, because Severus was a great reformer of the Roman military. He's the first big military reformer of the Principate phase of empire, in fact. And then finally, I'll talk about his Expeditio Felicissima Britannica, which is a contemporary name we have from an inscription in Corbridge for the Severan attempts to conquer Scotland in 209 and 210 before he died in 211. And within that, I'll talk about the timetable. He arrives in 208 and then he dies in 211 and everything in between. I'll talk about why he came. I'll detail the force that he used, which is the largest force ever to campaign in British history, over 50,000 men. I'll then talk about the logistics that he put in place to support these troops in the field in the far north, and then give you my take on the strategy he used and why he was so successful before he died. Talk about the campaigns themselves, and then finish off talking about his legacy. Okay, most of the images, most of the slides are pictures I'll talk to. There are one or two wordy ones, but most of them are going to be pictures I'll talk to. But here's a wordy one. So who's Severus? Well, Severus, he was born in Leptis Magna in Tripolitania in the 11th of April, AD 145. Leptis Magna and Tripolitania, which is effectively the eastern end of Africa Proconsularis, the major Roman North African province. And today it's in western Libya. He was the emperor from 193 to 211. He campaigned in Britain from 208 to 211, then died in York in the freezing cold of a British February, 4th February AD 211. And he founded the Severan Dynasty, which, just to run through the members for you, was Septimius Severus until 211, Caracalla and Geta for about 8 months, then Caracalla on his own till 217, when he was assassinated. The Praetorian prefect Macrinus takes over very briefly. He's replaced when another Severan goes on the throne, which is Elagabalus, and then finally Alexander Severus. And when Alexander Severus is assassinated in 235, this initiates the crisis of the 3rd century, where the Roman Empire nearly imploded. So the Severan period here, really, certainly Severus's reign himself was at the high point of the Principate phase of empire. The sources that we use to talk about Severus, well, we've got three very good primary sources. When I say very good, compared to many primary sources, we've got Cassius Dio, Herodian, and the anonymous Historia Augusta. They are good in the fact that they all carry historian detail, so it's quite easy to cross-reference and pick narratives from their writings and then cross-reference that with archaeological finds and things like that as well. So especially Cassius Dio is exceptionally helpful. You've got the Latin chroniclers who then used their narratives for their own a century, 2 centuries later. But modern sources also, particularly Anthony Burley, Andy Burley's dad of Vindolanda fame. Anthony Burley was one of my mentors when I was researching Severus, and he wrote a biography about 40 years ago, which is still a very good book as far as I'm concerned. Shepherd Freer, when he was writing, covered it as well. Then David Breeze still talks about Severus, and especially the Severan phase on Hadrian's Wall today. Then in terms of Roman Scotland, Lawrence Kepi and Anthony Cam are excellent. Finally, very important is Rebecca Jones, because Rebecca Jones, as many of you will know, is the world expert, in my opinion, on Roman marching camps, which enable us in the Severan campaigns to dot the route of his march across far north British territory, as I'll detail later. And then finally, archaeology is playing a really important role now, because there's what appears to be, and I'll detail it later, a major depopulation event towards the end of Severus's campaigning, when effectively he called for a genocide in his last campaign in 210. And the archaeology is now showing that this effectively occurred, because you have a huge depopulation event for about 80 years in the far north of Britain, but more of that later. Right, let's get a flavour of the campaigns, okay, to understand the brutality of this conflict in the far north of Britain at the end of Severus's reign. At the end of the 209 campaign, Severus thought he won, and he declared that he was Britannicus and he had coins minted, as did Caracalla, who campaigned with him, while Geta and Julia Domina stayed in York. And they thought they won, but there was a rebellion from the Maeatae and the Caledonian confederations north of the border over the winter. So the Romans had to go back in 210 and do it again. And clearly Severus wasn't very happy. So these are the words which Cassius Dio puts in the mouth of Severus, talking to his gathered troops outside York before they go and campaign in the 210 campaign. And he's having Severus paraphrase the Iliad. This is Agamemnon talking to his brother Menelaus. But these are the words which are put in the mouth of Severus by Cassius Dio. No, we are not going to leave a single one of them alive. Down to the babies in their mother's wombs, not even they must live. The whole people must be wiped out of existence, with none to shed a tear for them, leaving no trace. So for me, that's quite unequivocal, despite the fact that the words are being put in his mouth by Cassius Dio and it's paraphrasing. That's basically saying kill everybody. And as I detailed just now in the archaeological record, as we'll see, that appears to actually have happened. So the second campaign in particular was absolutely brutal, and it's brutal both ways, by the way, because the Romans had huge casualties as well. But more of that later. So Roman Britain, the 2nd century AD, and here we're building up to Severus coming over at the beginning of the 3rd century in 208, okay? So for me, and I'm now living in the Derbyshire Dales, even further, close to the northern frontier, I always say that Britain was the Wild West of the Roman Empire, where you're a long way from the imperial centre, and the far north is never truly conquered, apart from maybe briefly by Agricola for about 6 months in the AD 80s, but only briefly. So the far north is never fully conquered, so you need a very big military presence all the time in Britain, which I estimate to be 12% of the entire military establishment, 3 or 4 legions, equivalent number of auxiliaries, in what is only 4% of the empire's territory. So there's a huge weighting there in favour of the military, which puts a huge strain actually on the north and the west, and it means that there's a clear divide in the province of Britannia, which Severus later initiated to split in two, actually. There's a clear divide along a line basically from the Severn through to the Humber, and if you're south and east of that, you're okay. You're fully fat, functioning part of the Roman Empire. All the wealth from the regional economy goes into the fiscus imperial treasury. But if you're north and west of it, then everything is devoted to keeping the military in play in the far north. So it's a much nicer experience living in the Roman world if you're in the south and east. And then as you build up through the 2nd century, you get a series of campaigns taking place in Britain, usually around the time of a new emperor or dynasty, almost as though one of the easiest places to pick a fight when you were a new Roman emperor was in the far north of Britain. So we have a conflict taking place at the beginning of the reign of Hadrian, Hadrian's Wall, conflict taking place at the beginning of the reign of Antoninus Pius, the Antonine Wall, conflict taking place at the beginning of the reign of Marcus Aurelius and Lucius Verus, conflict taking place at the accession of Commodus in AD 180. And it's towards the end, around this narrative about the conflict in Commodus's reign, that you get the Maeatae and Caledonians mentioned for the first time. This is a slide I'll go back to later, but it's just useful to get your eye in about this campaigning, what I call battle space. So you can see here, you've got the Caledonians south, you've got the Highland boundary fault, that's the Highland line, above it the Highlands, below it the lowlands, then the Caledonians in the upper Midland Valley, so in the upper lowlands, then the Maeatae either side of the Antonine Wall into the Scottish borders. They are the marching camps Severus built, but I'm going to come back to it. I just wanted you to see the geography. So we'll now talk about Severus himself, the short biography. Well, this is Leptis Magna. Everywhere that Severus went as emperor, and I've seen many of these, including many in North Africa and elsewhere in the Mediterranean, there is a really big Severan phase, as though all the regional authorities knew when Severus was arriving, they got to monumentalize his arrival and reign. And there's no better example than his hometown, Leptis Magna, because nearly everything you see there today is Severan. And you can see here the harbour was built by Severus, the Pharos by Severus, the governor's palace by Severus, the theatre by Severus, the forum and basilica by Severus, and the public bathhouse by Severus. So nearly everything you see today in modern Leptis Magna is Severan. Where is Leptis Magna? Bottom right of the map there. So that's Africa Proconsularis. Remember, North Africa, well, the Roman Empire is a Mediterranean empire. Let's remember that. The bolt-on odd bits are us and the Gauls and the Germans, but it's a Mediterranean empire largely, with North Africa being a full fat functioning part of it, and possibly, I think actually probably the richest part of the Roman Empire, Africa Proconsularis and Egypt, where huge amounts of wealth were made with the grain supply for the Cura Annona in Rome and elsewhere in the Mediterranean, olive oil manufacturing, the slave trade, a variety of other things. So North Africa, Africa Proconsularis, was super rich. And Leptis Magna was the richest part of it, and you can see it there. So that's where Severus grew up, spent a number of his years growing up in Carthage. This is the Severan family tree. So the thing to note here is the top name, which is Severus's great-grandfather, Severus Septimius Mesa. Mesa is a Phoenician, Punic, Carthaginian name. And remember, the colonists who ran North Africa after the invasion of the Phoenician colonists were the Carthaginians, the Phoenicians. So all the key cities, including Leptis Magna, were founded actually by the Phoenician colonists. So Severus actually was, through his father's line, Phoenician. He was a Carthaginian, probably had more in common with Hannibal than he did with any Roman emperor. But it's his great-grandfather, Lucius Septimius Severus, who was the first one to sort of really make their name. He became the big man in Leptis Magna at a time when, probably the reign of Trajan, it was obvious that the Romans were not only here to stay, but were thriving. And so therefore he changed the family name. So the cognomen changes to the Severans. That's where the Severans comes from. Septimius and Severus obviously reference between them the number 7, which is a magical number for the Romans, and in particular it's the 7 stars of the Great Bear, which usually is the star which is closest, the constellation closest to the pole star, and it's got a magical function in the Roman world. So that's probably why they style themselves such. So Lucius Septimius Severus, Severus's grandfather, made it big. Chose to be an equestrian though, the level below senators, even though he was rich enough to be a senator, probably because the amount of wealth he would have had to have spent on public buildings. His son, Septimius Geta, wasn't as famous as his father or his own son, probably because he was ill. But then you have Severus marrying, Severus himself being born, with an elder brother called Geta, who also served in Britain before Severus, actually, who served with the 2nd Legion in Caledonian, a sister called Septimia Octavia, and then we have Severus himself. And then Severus then really succeeds in his early career on the Cursus Honorum and becomes the new big man of Leptis Magna, marries his first wife, Pacia Marciana, who dies, then marries Julia Domna, the love of his life. I'll detail in a minute. There's Caracalla and Geta, there's Heliogabalus, and there's Alexander Severus. So the key takeaway here is that Severus's paternal line were Carthaginian. His mother's line were Italian, but his father's line were Carthaginian. So when people say, was he the African emperor? Yes. Was he dark-skinned? Absolutely. He portrayed himself as being dark-skinned, as you see in the Tondo, and he was Phoenician or Carthaginian. A wordy slide. Let's just go through his life and career through to AD 195, the year of the 5 emperors, when he becomes the emperor. Born in 145, enters the Senate in 170, marries his first wife, Pacia Marciana, in 175. His first big posting is to be the legate, the legionis legatus, the general in charge of a legion, of Legio IV Scythica, which is in Syria. It's one of the veteran legions on the Syrian frontier facing the Parthians, Persians. He really succeeds there. And while he's there, he gets on very well with the Syrian governor, who's later the first emperor in the year of the 5 emperors, Pertinax, who I've also written a book about, the son of a slave who became the emperor of Rome. And the two of them got on really well. So from that point, Pertinax became the mentor of Severus, which is important as you get to the year of the 5 emperors. Pacia Marciana died in 182. Then in 185, Severus gets his first major governorship, which is to become the governor of Gallia Lugdunensis. Gallia Lugdunensis being the very important wealthy province, the thin strip through the middle of Gaul, running from, say, the Channel Islands through to Lugdunum, which is modern Lyon, which was its provincial capital near the Alps. And that's where Severus became the governor. That's where he then married Julia Domna, the story being that he clearly met Julia Domna while he was in Syria. Julia Domna was the daughter of the high priest of the sun god Heliogabalus in Emesa in modern Syria. And the story goes that Severus wrote to her while he was in Lugdunum, Lyon, said, will you marry me? And she said, yes, straight away. And she goes through the eastern and western Mediterranean to Marseille, and then goes up the Rhone to Lyon, and they get married. And I've actually stood literally on the place where the governor's palace was, where they probably got married, which is on the high ground, sort of in Lyon, just above the modern city, which is amazing. I highly recommend Lyon as a place to go and visit, and nearby Vienne, absolutely beautiful. Caracalla's born a year later in Lyon. Geta's born a year later when they're in Milan. Severus becomes the consul in Rome for the first time in 190, but later in 190 he gets a really good governorship, and that's to become the governor of Pannonia Superior, which is important because it is the key, the province on the Danube, the upper Danube, which is the key to accessing northeastern Italy. So it's defending the Danubian frontier from the German and Sarmatian tribes north of the Danube. Remember, we're at the tail end. We've just finished the Marcomannic Wars, the very brutal series of conflicts which ran from about 165 to 180. When the German Marcomanni, with their Sarmatian Iezigis allies and other German allies, penetrated as far as northeastern Italy for the first time since the Cimbrian Wars at the end of the 2nd century BC. So that was a big deal. So being tasked with holding the frontier there is a really important posting. The provincial capital is the legionary fortress at Carnuntum. And Severus, while he's there, has 5 crack legions, because these are all the veteran legions from the Marcomannic Wars. It is important because on New Year's Eve 192-193, Commodus is assassinated by a cabal in his court. Commodus, by the way, is as mad and bad as he's portrayed, I think, by Joaquin Phoenix in Gladiator 2. He's one of my least favorite Roman emperors. I think he deserves all the bad press he gets. And you have this cabal of the Praetorian prefect, the court chamberlain, and his mistress Marcia, who try and poison him to death on New Year's Eve 192-193. But around midnight, when the event takes place, he's been drinking all day since New Year's Eve, and he basically gets given poison sweetmeats by Marcia, but he sweats the poison out in his bathing complex, realizes something's afoot, but this is a very well worked out assassination, because they have the Commodus's wrestling trainer, Narcissus, on standby in case there's a problem. So he's called into play, and he strangles Commodus to death, later to meet his death being eaten by lions in the arena. So it didn't end up well for Narcissus either. So Commodus is dead. And the Praetorian prefect and guard elects the consul Pertinax as the emperor. At this time, Pertinax is also the city prefect, so he's the guy that's got the keys to Rome effectively. So Pertinax, the mentor of Severus, is now the emperor. Pertinax wants to be a very worthy emperor, though, along the lines of Marcus Aurelius, and he realizes that Commodus has emptied the imperial fiscus treasury, he's got no money, so he has this fire sale of all Pertinax, all of Commodus's goods and Commodus's slaves and everything else to put money in the treasury. However, he still doesn't have much at the end of January when the Praetorian Guard comes to him and say, we want some money. And he says, no, there isn't any. And they come back at the end of February and they say, we want some money or we'll kill you. And he says, nope, there's still no money in the treasury. So at the end of March, they kill him. So he's assassinated. And that's when you get this story of the Senator Didius Julianus bribing the Praetorian Guard at their camp to make him the emperor, and he's there for a short time. However, there are three other candidates in play. You've got Severus on the Danube with his 5 crack legions, and then Severus's 2 friends who, along with Pertinax and also the real Maximus from Gladiator, who's called Maximianus, who were a band of young officers, a band of brothers during the Marcomannic Wars. They all know each other, and they're now all fighting to the death to become emperor. So Severus now has to deal with Clodius Albinus, who is the fantastically named provincial governor in Britain, and Pescennius Niger, who's the provincial governor in Syria. Severus, clearly with his 5 crack legions on the Danube, has the whip hand because he's closer. So he piles down into Rome, declares that he's the emperor. The Senate say, as he walks in with his sword drawn, surrounded by legionaries, absolutely, you are the emperor. And by October, he's the emperor. He disbands the Praetorian Guard because they killed his friend Pertinax, reforms it with 10,000 of his own veterans from the Danube, and basically then he's in power until 211 when he dies in Britain, always having the backing of the military. He's one of the most militaristic of all Roman emperors. This is Pertinax, by the way. The statue on the left is in the Vatican Museum in one of the corners, which millions of people pass by every year, no one knowing who he is. But to the Romans, he was as famous as Caesar or Augustus because he was the man that proved that the Roman everyman story that anyone could achieve in Roman life, because he was the son of a slave, a manumitted slave, who did become the emperor. And that's his bust, which is relevant to all of you in Kent, because that's the one that was found in Luddingston Villa. The original is in the British Museum, along with his father. And replicas are in Luddingston today. So that's Pertinax. Served in Britain 3 times, by the way, as a junior officer in York with 6 victrix, then commanding auxiliary units at houses on Hadrian's Wall, and then finally as the governor in 185 to 187 when he was nearly assassinated before he went back to Rome. So he's got a big story to play in Roman Britain, actually. That's Pertinax, Severus's mentor, who's now died and is the reason why Severus descended on Rome to become the emperor. So how does Severus deal with Albinus and Niger? Well, firstly, he buys off Albinus in Britain by making him his Caesar, his junior emperor. He then mounts his first Eastern campaign against Niger, who he defeats and beheads in Syria, and then campaigns against 3 border states, Osroene, Aberdeen, and Hatra, which are border states with Parthia, which he also defeats because they actually sided against the Romans after Pertinax's assassination. He then begins an invasion of Parthia, but has to call it off because he hears that Albinus has usurped back in Britain and has arrived in Gaul with the 3 British legions, 6 Augusta, 20 Valeria Victrix, and 2 Augusta. Sorry, 6 Victrix, 20 Valeria Victrix, and 2 Augusta. And he's also got a Spanish legion as well. So Albinus is now in Gaul with 4 legions, and he captures Lugdunum because he knows that Severus can't ignore that, because that's a very important place in Severus's life, because that's where he married Julia Domna. So there's a huge battle takes place at Lugdunum, which Dio says 300,000 troops participated in. Highly unlikely, because at the time the whole Roman military establishment was about 350,000 men. Severus, by the way, commanded more legions than any other Roman emperor because he created legios 1, 2, and 3 Parthica for his Eastern campaigns. So he took the number to 33. Severus wins after a 2-day battle, almost loses his horse twice, gets saved by the Praetorian Guard once, and eventually wins a very hard battle, executes Albinus, whose head goes back to Rome on a pike, ritually tramples over Albinus's body on his new charger, and then Severus starts scourging Britain because, of course, the recalcitrant province supported Albinus, and it's Severus who built the land wall of Roman London, which became the medieval wall, which to this very day still delineates the square mile, the city of London. And I love that fact that a Roman emperor from North Africa, Leptis Magna, Septimius Severus, still through building the land wall in London, delineated the modern city of London. I really love that. He then has his second Eastern campaign against Parthia, which is highly successful, complete victory, one of the few Roman emperors to sack the Parthian capital, Ctesiphon. And then he has this sort of like triumphal tour through North Africa, his home territories, where everywhere you go, whether it's Lambasis or Timgad or Hippo Regis or Jamila or Caesarea, they all have all the basilica and forums in the center of the towns are still the Severan ones, which were built for that triumphal tour. And he also campaigns in North Africa, and it's Severus who extends the territorial boundaries of the Roman Empire to its greatest extent, apart from very briefly under Trajan, when Trajan conquered the Parthian Empire all the way through to the Persian Gulf. But Severus extends it everywhere he goes, so he's really driving the scale of the Roman Empire. He's an emperor who really believes in monumentalization and monumentalizing his rule, founding a new dynasty, as we'll see when we talk about Rome. Then returns to Rome. He only ever went to Rome 4 times as emperor. He was only there for about 6 months because he hated the place. I really didn't like the senators, we'll see in a minute. Then finally, 208 to 211 campaigns of Britain and dies in 211, and we'll go back to that at the end of the talk. There's the beautiful section of land wall next to Tower Hill Tube Station with the odd statue of Trajan next to it. Well, the bits at the bottom, the really nicely worked pieces of ragstone from Kent, subject to my PhD thesis, Ragstone to Riches, and the tile bonding layers there, that's the Severan land wall. And it's really worth going to the Vine Street Museum, where you've got a really good section of it on display now in its own bespoke museum as well. That's Roman York. Severus turned York into his imperial capital for the last 3 years of his reign when he came to Britain. We know it actually was the official capital, not just he was based there, but he turned it into the capital because he took the imperial fiscus treasure with him. He took half the Senate with him, took the imperial family with him, leaving Julia Domna and Gita to run the empire effectively from York while he was campaigning in the north with Caracalla. And he replaced any governors and legates around the empire and procurators who he couldn't trust with North Africans. So effectively what Severus did just before he came to Britain at the end of his life was really reset the empire sort of with a North African theme. Some call it a hostile takeover. So there's Severan York. This is Carlisle, actually. That's me early this year when I had a pleasure of joining the amazing team who were up at Carlisle excavating the Severan building there, which looks as though it may actually turn out to be a huge monumental mansio to celebrate Severus's visit there during his 209-210 campaigns. That's me holding the third head, which is recently been in the news that they found there. So that's an amazing site, actually. If you get a chance, do go and see it. So we'll move on to Severan Rome. Firstly, that's the Arch of Septimius Severus at the head of the forum. You can see there you've got Gita's name removed by Caracalla, but the Arch of Septimius Severus is there to celebrate his victory over the Parthians, built about 202, and it was built right on top of the Senate House. That's the building on the right. In fact, part of Severus's arch, the foundations are actually on the foundations of the Senate House, which is his statement saying to the senators, I'm the boss, you behave or else. And that's one of my favorite sort of monumental arches in the whole empire. But there are other things in classical Rome as well, which are Severan. Temple of Vesta, well, that is the Severan version of it, which Julia Domna sponsored, because she rebuilt large chunks of the Forum Romanum after a fire which took place in the reign of Commodus, including rebuilding in this brand new form the Temple of Vesta. That's Severan. The Imperial Palace on the Palatine Hill, most of it you see today is Severan. So they're the Severan buildings in the Palatine Palace. That's the viewing platform on top of the Severan buildings, which is a recreation of the Severan viewing platform over the Circus Maximus, which is there. And then if you look into your left, you'll see shimmering in the heat haze most of the time, the Baths of Caracalla, which were going to be called the Baths of Septimius Severus. They were going to be his big gift to the people of Rome, built on the Via Appia as you approach the Palatine Hill and the Imperial Palace. It would have been clad in marble. It would have absolutely stunned as you entered Rome through the Via Appia, and you can imagine all the statuary inside and everything. It's absolutely enormous. Of course, Severus died before it was finished, so Caracalla nicked the idea and called it the Baths of Caracalla. For me, it's always the Baths of Septimius Severus. Top of the Palatine Hill overlooking the Colosseum, in the top corner, this here is the Temple of Elagabalus, which was of a scale of the Temple of Claudius, which is on the other side of the Colosseum. Absolutely enormous Severan temple. That's a very happy archaeologist standing next to the Temple of Elagabalus, with the Colosseum in the background. And then on the right hand side, below me there, you can see the Arch of Constantine. And on the right hand side, you'd have had the Temple of Claudius. And then a new museum, the Museum of the former Urbis, which is just opened on the Chilean Hill, just down the road from the Colosseum. This is on the right. You can see as it would have appeared in a temple in the Forum of Nerva. That is a map made in marble of Severan Rome, big chunks of which are still in existence and have been taken out of storage in the Capitoline Museum and laid out into this amazing new museum you can see on the right. And one of my favorite things there is actually when I'm taking tours around Rome to take people there and show them where the hotel that they're staying is in right now. But much of that still exists, and that is Severan Rome, more of Severan Rome. So the Severan military, well, the military of the Roman Principate, the phase of the Roman Empire from the accession of Augustus in 27 BC as the first emperor until the accession of Diocletian in AD 284. The Principate, the military there were largely created along the lines of Augustus. So Augustus takes the idea of the Marian Legion, the Independent Legion, all the troops equipped the same, and then Augustus creates them down to 5,500 men, not 6,000, of which 1,200 are full fat fighting men, but there are also specialists in doing other things like being carpenters or stonemasons or fletchers or sword cutlers. That's the legion and the supporting auxilia, which broadly goes all the way through the Principate. But a change begins to take place in the reign of Severus, which is completed a century later by Constantine, when you move from what I call the early Imperial Roman legions to the late Imperial Roman army. So this is the Arch of Severus, their auxiliaries. These are classic Principate legionaries on Trajan's column. So you can see from the beginning of the 2nd century AD, lorica segmentata, scutum shields, etc., Imperial Gallic helmets. That's your classic Principate legionary. They're still there in the reign of Marcus Aurelius. These are panels from a monument to Marcus Aurelius, which are reused on the Arch of Constantine, which is why it's a very confusing monument, because that's got Trajanic and Antonine sculpture on there, reused, because basically Constantine was broke when he became the emperor. So only the lower panels on that are actually, the lower ones and the very top ones are actually Constantinian. These are also classic Principate legionaries from the mid-2nd century. There's a soldier I painted. So this is, the figure was called, when I bought it, the Severan Legionary. And you can see the changes beginning to take place here with this particular legionary. So you can see he's got a spear there instead of a pilum. And often you see depictions of Severan legionaries by the beginning of the 3rd century carrying spears, which is a more utilitarian weapon, especially when you're fighting cavalry, than using the pilum heavy-weighted javelin. And also the sword's been changed here as well, from the gladius, the shorter stabbing sword, the famous Roman weapon, to a spatha, the later Roman slashing sword based on a Germanic cavalry sword, which is a longer weapon and again gives you longer reach. So this is all about the legionaries as you go into the 3rd century, having fought the Parthians, fought the Sarmatians, now getting more sort of utilitarian equipment as opposed to being purely specialist heavy infantry. And you can see here as well another change taking place. This is a Severan legionary on the Arch of Severus. He's got a round or oval shield, and of course, a century later, on the Constantine's figures on his arch, they've all got round shields, and you move away again from the heavy scutum body shield, which is the principate shield, through to this more utilitarian, easy to handle rounder shield because it gives you more reach. And there you can see again on a panel from the Arch of Septimius Severus here, what you're looking at are Severan legionaries effectively deployed in a spear phalanx fighting Parthian cataphract armored cavalry. And these are the late Roman legionaries on the Arch of Constantine on the contemporary panels, the original ones, which are Constantinian, that's your classic late Roman legionary. So your arc goes from the Marian and Augustan and Caesarian legionaries here, through the classic Principate legionary here, to the Severan legionary here with his spear and spatha, through to these full fat late Roman legionaries here. And it's Severus that begins that change. One final note is Severus was obsessed with keeping the military on side, and famously on his deathbed told Caracalla be harmonious to each other, enrich the soldiers and scorn everybody else, and probably throw a swear word in that. Well, clearly they weren't harmonious to each other because they hated each other, and within a year Geta was dead. But even Caracalla, who wasn't one of my favorite Roman emperors, managed to keep the military on side. So we're now going to move on to the Expeditio Felissima Britannica. So this is the Severan campaigns at the end of his life to conquer the far north of Britain. So the timetable is as follows. 207, Severus is in Rome, and he gets a letter from Senecio, who's the British governor, which we'll talk about in a minute. And the letter says basically, can you come or send reserves? And Severus doubles down and comes with reserves because of the issue I'm going to talk about. He then orders all the military units in the west and on the Rhine and Danube to get vexillation, so regiments or brigades ready to send to Britain to support the campaign, the British legions. Then in 208, the Severan army and himself and the imperial family arrive in York and create York as the imperial capital. And then the first campaign takes place in 209, second genocidal campaign in 210. Severus dies in York in 211, and Caracalla and Geta return to Rome. And then by the end of the year, Geta's murdered by or on the orders of Caracalla. So that's the timeline we're going to go into. Why did Severus go to Britain? Well, firstly, he was born in Rome. This is one of the great soldier emperors who really didn't like being in Rome, hated the Senate and the senators, and so really, really preferred to be outside of Rome on campaign. Secondly, Caracalla and Geta were living the high life as playboys in Rome with their own entourages, severely misbehaving, spending far too much money and creating enemies everywhere. And so Severus needed to get them out of the imperial capital. Then you have Severus and any other Roman emperor, how they measured themselves to the greatest of the Roman emperors as the Romans saw it. So for us, we will probably say the greatest Roman is Caesar. Severus, in the Roman period, they would say it was Augustus, with Caesar second, but Augustus, the first emperor, was the big guy. So all Roman emperors measured themselves against Augustus. And Horace, at the turn of the 1st century BC AD, wrote a poem mostly eulogizing Augustus, but in one sentence he says, Augustus will only be a god if he defeats the Persians, the Parthians, and the Britons. And of course, Augustus never did. Planned a campaign against Britain 3 times, but never did. So Augustus didn't do those 2 things, but other Roman emperors tried to. And Severus has already defeated the Parthians. So in his head, this most martial of emperors, he's thinking to himself, well, look, if I can defeat Britain as well, I've done something which even Augustus hasn't done. That makes me the greatest emperor. Also, he was ill, suffering from a pulmonary condition which was badly affecting his feet, which people say today is gout, but actually was probably indicative of a much broader a heart or lung condition. But he was ill, so it was the last chance at military glory. When he died, he was 65. Also, after the rebellion of Albinus against Severus, which culminated in the Battle of Lugdunum in 197, Severus had been slow to reman the British legions because he didn't trust them. So there's a fair chance that the northern frontier was actually undermanned. So it presents an opportunity I'll come on to in a second. Then we have Senecio's letter. And the letter, the line that's important is, the letter says, the island will be overrun because we're being attacked from the north. I need the emperor or reinforcements. And the language is very specific there. doesn't say that the north is going to be overrun or York. It says the island. So it's clearly overemphasizing the fact that there's a major threat. Whether this was an invention, creation by Severus to give him an excuse to invade or not, we'll never know. But certainly the way the letter's phrased, it sounds though there was peril in the far north. And finally, what may have prompted the Maeatae and Caledonians to actually attack in the first place? Well, firstly, these confederations had only just come into being from the various tribes which Ptolemy details at the time of Agricola and into the 2nd century, largely through contact with Rome, either through the transfer of wealth or power. So you end up with these huge confederations, and the leaders of those had a warrior nobility they needed to keep happy, and they needed plunder. And secondly, the weather in Severus's campaigns in Scotland was terrible. The Romans didn't mince the words when they were talking about British weather. We call it changeable, laughably. The Romans called it wet and cold. So for Roman authors to say it was worse than usual means it was really, really bad. And it looks as though there was a sort of a major climate event in the 2 or 3 years around the Severan campaigns. So you may have had a harvest shock in the far north, i.e. there was famine as well. What was in Severus's force? Well, this is what I call shock and awe writ large. 57,000 men overall, the largest campaigning force ever in Britain, who arrived all along the east coast through all the major ports. Ended up being based in York and effectively creating the first Roman field army. What did it comprise? Well, the Praetorian Guard, 10,000 strong, they all came. Imperial Guard cavalry, 2,000 strong. The Equites Singularis Augusta. Severus's own Legio II Parthica, his pet legion, which he normally based near Rome. Very unusual, by the way. At this stage in the Principe, all the Roman legions were based around the frontiers, except the one in Spain, in Lyon. And then Severus bases one near Rome, Legio II Parthica, clearly to give him some more muscle against the senators. But that comes with him as well. The 3 British legions I've detailed, who fought early with Albinus, 15,000 British auxiliaries supporting them, vexellations of legionaries and auxiliaries from the Rhine and Danube, and finally the 7,000 sailors and marines of the Classis Britannica, the regional fleet, which is a story people often overlook, but it's very important in all Roman military campaigns. Britain is no different. The Classis Britannica supported the land campaigns of the Roman military in every one of their major campaigns. That's why all Roman forts are on rivers. Often these later become sort of the urban landscape of modern Britain today. These are 3 Liburna galleys of the Classis Britannica. By this time, there was no symmetrical threat to the Roman navies, not until the sort of 4th century, really. So instead of having the big polyreme galleys of the Republic, they had these very nippy bireme galleys, Liburnae, nicknamed after pirate ships from the Balkans, which were very good at operating along coast and down river systems. And that is one of my favorite pieces of archaeology. That is a lead waster from very close to Brancaster, one of the early Saxon shore forts dating to about 220. So when the Classis Britannica still existed. And there's a graffiti of a Roman galley. You can see here, you've got the ram, you've got the planking, you've got the round shields, you've got the foremast, you've got the main mast here. That graffiti is of a Roman galley of the Classis Britannica drawn by someone who saw it. And I think that's absolutely fantastic. Here you've got all the major Roman networks. We're looking particularly on the east coast here. So Roman troops coming in through Dover and Richborough and London, through the Great Estuary in East Anglia, through Case St Edmunds, Bentrice and Orham, through Bruff on Humber, through South Shields and Wallsend. They were all used to get these troops over, a lot of them from the Rhine Estuary. And what did one of these major fortified harbours look like? Well, Severus built 3 I'm going to detail in a second to support his this specific campaign. So this is that's the fortified harbour at Caerleon. You can see behind it the amphitheatre, which is still fantastic today. And there's the legionary fortress of 2 Augusta. Well, that's the bit you don't see today. That's the fortified harbour. And here are some Liburna of the Classis Britannica and some various kinds of merchant ships as well. So the first logistics base Severus built to support his campaigns in the far north was in South Shields, and you can go and see it today. When you go and visit Arbea, you see the layout of the Roman fort there. That actually is the Severan phase of it. You're not looking at barrack blocks, you're looking at granaries, because Severus increased the number of granaries there by a factor of 10 to feed his troops. And then as the campaign progressed, he built another fortified harbour at Cramond-on-the-Forth near Edinburgh. And then as it progressed again, he built another fortified harbour at Carpou-on-the-Tay. That's the Principia and the crop mark. And that's the view from the site of the fort on the banks of the Tay looking south, and beyond those mountains you've got Edinburgh. The field in front of you, the ploughed field, is crunching with Roman archaeology, never been fully excavated. That's Carpou-on-the-Tay. So the strategy, Severus' strategy was brutal and it was effective. Arrives in 208. 209, the start of the campaigning season in late spring, launches the first campaign into the far north. The 50,000 land troops go through as one homogeneous body, eviscerating everything before them along Deer Street in the Scottish borders. They build 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 marching camps as they go through. The marching camps are the largest marching camps in the Roman world. They're 70 hectares, so they can take the entire army of 50,000. He then builds Carpou, and finally he builds a bridge of boats across the Forth, probably along the line of the Queensferry railway bridge today. And probably about 900 vessels are going to be needed for this, and they're not the warships either. A lot of them are specially constructed. Once the bridge of boats is built across the Forth, he divides his force into two. He gives Caracalla command of the 2/3 of them, which includes all 3 British legions, because they're the ones that know British territory best. And they go up the Highland line and block off every glen they get to with a glen blocker fort, exactly the same as Agricola did. Some of them actually opened Agricolan forts, and the key anchor one's the one here at Ardwick. And eventually gets to Stonehaven here on the North Sea coast, where the last fort is at Keirhouse, and that's it. All the glens are blocked off, so anybody stuck below the Highland line now can't get out through the Highlands. He then, at the same time, has the Classis Britannica close off the coast. So everybody who's left in the lowlands of Scotland, in Fife and in the Upper Midland Valley are stuck. And then, once that's in place, he takes the 1/3 of the troops that are left himself, which includes 2 Parthica, the Praetorian Guard, and the Equites Augusta Singularis, the Equites Singularis Augusta, and he crosses the Forth himself and hits the soft underbelly of British resistance and literally guts the place. And although hard fighting takes place, there is no set-piece battle, as with Agricola and Mons Graupius, and eventually a peace is agreed. So that's the Severan strategy. It's a very brutal campaign strategy. Marching camps play a key role there, because those marching camps are all well known in the archaeological record, all of a certain size, all matched academically to the Severan period and the Severan forces which he deployed there. There's your Roman legionaries building the marching camps. Tough job being a Roman legionary, marching 5 or 6 hours a day, spending 3 hours building a marching camp, making your bread, going to sleep, getting up, and then if you're carrying on, knocking the camp down and building another one at the end of the day again. So there's your legionaries building a marching camp. That's what a marching camp will look like. You know, it's a cartoon, but it's very good descriptive. There you've got the ditch, the earth from the ditch to create the bank, the palisade created from stakes carried by the legionaries or auxilia. Then inside, the layout's exactly the same as a permanent Roman fort, but temporary in nature, including the Principia and Praetorium in the middle. It's a very well-dressed Roman legate stroke historian there, filming a programme which is going to be on Channel 5 at the beginning of next year. And that was at the amazing Roman fort Park in the Pass, which is in Wrexham, which is a fully recreated Roman fort. And it's really, really highly recommended if you get a chance to go and visit. There's another view of the Roman marching camps. So just to reinforce the strategy the Romans used there. So again, brutally effective. Everybody together through Deer Street to the Forth. Caracalla with 2/3 along the Highland line, then Severus finishing everybody off once the Classis Britannica has sealed off the coast. Brutal and efficient. That's Deer Street going past the Roman fort site at Newstead near Melrose, Tremontium, which has got the wonderful museum there now. And that is the Newstead stone looking across in the ploughed field, the Roman fort. So it's a Flavian and Antonine fort at Tremontium. I use that picture though because the Severan marching camp is also in view. It's the entire hillside in the background. So the 70-hectare marching camp is that entire hillside in the background. That's how big it is. This is a great view of a Roman bridge of boats. This is from Trajan's column with Trajan crossing the Danube. And to give you a sense of this dangerous battle space the Romans were in, that's the anchor Highland Line fort at Ardoch, which is the only fort, certainly Roman Britain, where you get 5 sequential defensive ditches, which means it was a very dangerous territory indeed. Probably actually the reason there are 5 is because the fort got smaller over time and it withdrew within the area. So a new ditch was dug, but 3 of them are almost certainly Severan. That's at Ardoch in Angus. That's a view of the Highland Line from the Gasque Ridge, which is the high ground between the Tay and the Forth. And we're looking here north to the Highland Line, the Highlands. So when you see these dips here, they are glens giving access to the Highlands, and that's where Caracalla built his forts. So what were the campaigns like? I've nearly finished now, and then I'll take any questions. What were the campaigns like? Well, the 209 campaign, brutal and savage, absolutely savage. No meeting engagement, and it was a guerrilla warfare conflict. The Romans suffered as well as the natives. Dio says the natives used as some kind of supplement which allowed them to stay in the field in wet and cold conditions with little food for a lot longer than the Romans. And it's now thought that is actually the heath pea, which is a modern appetite suppressant, which you find in the north. There it is on the bottom right. Huge casualties on both sides. Dio says the Romans lost 50,000 men. Well, that's a lot, given the whole force was 57,000. So it's obviously an exaggeration, but it just emphasizes the fact the Romans didn't have it all their own way. But weight of numbers told in the end, and eventually the native super peace, which is agreed and is favorable to Rome. There's a story that when the peace is signed, Caracalla draws his sword behind Severus's back, but the Praetorian prefect puts his hand on Severus's sword hand to stop him actually killing his father. And then coins and medallions are minted to victory, and Severus and Caracalla call themselves Britannicus. And all's well, except we know it's not, because the Maeatae and Caledonians rebel over the winter. And the whole thing's repeated in 210 in exactly the same way, successfully for the Romans. The peace is also agreed. But this is when the genocide occurs, which we now can see in the archaeological record. Severus doesn't take part himself because he's now too ill. So Caracalla leads it on his own. So what's the legacy of all this immense effort, the largest campaigning force on British territory? First, Severus died in York in 211, so he didn't stay in the far north, and the Romans didn't stay. Caracalla and Geta hated being there. They wanted to get back to the high life in Rome, where they could squabble their way to become the sole emperor. Severus wanted them to be diarchs like Marcus Aurelius and Lucius Verus. But of course, as soon as Severus is dead, they both race each other literally with their own entourages separately back to Rome. By the end of the year, Caracalla has had Geta killed, who dies bleeding to death in Julie Domina's arms. Really, really sad story, really. The military force disperses in exactly the same Agricola's did in the late 1st century AD, and the line of the frontier, northern frontier, drops to Hadrian's Wall again. Did Severus intend to stay? I think so. I think Severus intended to incorporate the Scottish borders and Fife, and probably the upper Midland Valley to the Highland Line, into provincial Roman territory to the south. Was the effort worth it? Well, conquering the far north, it was a fail because it was never tried again by the Romans. But peace did break out to an extent on the northern frontier for around 80 years because of the brutal genocide. So in a sense, that's a success from a Roman perspective, because the northern frontier in Britain is not really mentioned by contemporary sources again until the Carausian Rebellion in the AD 280s into the AD 290s. And we have this evidence in the archaeological record of reforestation, agricultural land falling out of use, and settlements being abandoned. And then you end up with units of Caledonian being incorporated into Roman auxiliary regiments on the Rhine and Danube as well. So anybody who survived, if you're a male, you probably got forcibly recruited into the Roman military. And this is our sad end of the story. There's Severus telling Caracalla and Geta love each other and love the military, and they obviously hated each other. Caracalla killed Geta. It's a very sad end to the story. You can see how effective that Memorial Damnatio was if you look at the Arch of Septimius Severus. So on one of the columns, you've got these images of Caracalla and Geta with Parthian captives to celebrate their role in the father's victory. There's Geta with his face removed at the back, and because Geta never existed, because he'd been Memorio Damnatio'd, clearly anybody he knew or touched had never existed either, including his own Parthian captive. So even the Parthian captive has had his face removed. Now to become the subject of the day, with Caracalla and Geta, of course, being the chief protagonists, the bad guys in Gladiator 2. But Severus marches on through my book. So my aim is to put Severus back into the pantheon of well-known Roman emperors, given the very important role he had, not only in the story of the Roman Empire, but of Roman Britain. If you want to see me talking about the Severan phase of the Colosseum, because he rebuilt the top level after a fire, that's Dan Snow and I. We're on Thursday evening next week on Channel 5, Colosseum, Death in the Arena, where I'm one of Dan's experts, sort of talking to him about all the various aspects of the games and gladiators, etc. That's me about to go underground to one of the quarries where the stones for that Severan rebuild came from. I've got another show with Dan, which is on Channel 5 in January, which is about Pompeii. That's me standing on the Basilica in January, filming with Dan with some very bemused onlookers wondering why these two middle-aged blokes have climbed on the Basilica in Pompeii. We were allowed to, by the way. It was part of the filming. And that's dawn breaking as we were filming in the theatre in Pompeii as well. That was a really special moment this year. And if anybody wants to contact me, they're all my contacts. I'm very happy to answer any questions for anybody. If you want to email me, do follow me on my social media platforms. I'm on X, and I'm also on Instagram as well, Simon Elliot 8671. That's Simon Elliot 8671. And as the guys at CAS will tell you, I post images from all of my travels around the Roman Empire, which I'm perfectly happy for anybody to use for free. So just feel free to use them and keep up to speed with my books and publishing and broadcasting and touring and everything. That is it. Happy to take any questions from you now. So what I will do now is I'm going to stop the share, and then Jacob, if you want to take back control.
Simon, thank you so much. That was amazing. Thank you. What a whirlwind adventure through the life of an incredible character. And it is clear to see your...
I'm not showing you my gladiator either. There you go.
Oh, yeah. Well,
that's the pointy end of the industrial scale killing machine that is the Roman military.
It's clear you are very passionate about this story and this character, you know. And I always find it amazing that so much of the Roman Empire story does put Britain front and center, even though we're supposed to be this island at the end of the world and cold and miserable and all the rest. But yeah, it's brilliant. And this particular story seems to be one of the most important in Roman Britain. So it's great.
The thing to remember is this is the largest ever campaigning force on British soil. I mean, the largest battle on British soil was probably the Battle of Towton in the Wars of the Roses, when you got 30,000 men overall engaged, overall. And this Severan campaign is one of the sides is 57,000 men. So clearly really went to town to try and achieve his aims.
He had something to say, definitely. If we have any questions, please pop them in the chat. I'm just checking that it's working. Jacob, if you can see the chat and see if it's working for us. I've got a quick question about not Severus, about the Pertinax bust. Actually, you said it was found in Lullingston.
Yeah, it was found in the ward upstairs staircase to the grotto or whatever it was downstairs. You know that when the religious site, whatever it was, in the Undercroft was changed into a Christian function, the original stairwell from memory was bricked up, and that's where the head of Pertinax and his father were found.
Okay. Do you think it is because of a specific association with the region, or do you think it's just people celebrating a hero?
The busts were clearly the bust of Pertinax and his father, because this is a very big story in the Roman world. Remember, this is a son of a slave who became the Roman emperor. So it's like the everyman story. It's a really important story for the Romans, not to us in our world, but for the Romans, it was as important as probably Augustus or Caesar, because this man had made it from nothing. The the two phases where the bust would have been made were either when he was the governor in the 180s or when he was briefly the emperor. And then it was clearly Memorial Damnatio because the nose has been knocked off. But it's quite a half-hearted attempt to slight it because they've not really gone to town, they've just knocked the nose off. So it's almost like word arrives when Didius Julianus in the mid-AD 193, briefly becomes the emperor. Word arrives that Pertinax is not a good guy, he's now a bad guy. So they knock his nose off and then put it in a cupboard somewhere. And then about 3 months later, Severus is the emperor, and word gets round that Pertinax is a good guy. And so actually, it's not really badly slighted. And so the story of Severus and Pertinax is very interesting. When Severus became the emperor, he deified Pertinax, his mentor, and then he had a formal funeral for him, which was a 3-day event in November in the Senate and the Forum Romanum and on the Palatine Hill. And at the end of it, which included 3 days of games, he built a funeral pyre in the Forum Romanum, on the top of which was a coffin of Pertinax, which actually was a wax effigy because his body had rotted too much. So a wax effigy was in the coffin, and then on top of the coffin was an eagle in a cage. And the pyre is lit, and there's a flame. This is Dio. It's beautifully written by Dio. And he was a senator. Dio was a contemporary, remember, of Severus and Pertinax. He was a senator. The flames sort of like go towards the top of the pyre. The wax effigy starts melting. The eagle starts going daft because he thinks he's going to get burned. And suddenly the cage door, trap door is lifted. The eagle piles out and flies skyward into heaven. That's the emperor being deified. That's the emperor going to heaven.
Sure.
So
Very
Severus
visual.
really went to town to bring Pertinax's story back.
Amazing.
He even,
Okay, so
he even took the name Pertinax as a new cognomen. So he added the name Pertinax to his own name, and often until the AD 206, 207s, if you look at where Severus has his name inscribed, and by the way, he reclaimed a lot of the monuments in Rome himself as well. So if you look at the Pantheon at the front where it says Marcus Agrippa, below it, there's a frieze which actually, you can see it, broad daylight. The frieze says Septimius Severus was here, and so was Caracalla. And when it says Septimius Severus, he calls himself Septimius Severus Pertinax. So he adopted the name.
I'm going to dash on because we're getting the messages, questions coming in thick and fast now. So we'll try to go through. So Gordon Hutchinson said, I'm writing a paper on the Roman history of Dover around the CLBR. I've said I believe the reason why they left around 210 AD was because of Severus. Have you any views on why they didn't return at the end of the campaign?
I refer very good question. I refer the gentleman to a fine book called Sea Eagles of Empire, 2016, Dr. Simon Elliot, now available as a paperback through Greenhill Publishing, which is the only book ever written about the Classis Britannica. And it's got everything in you need to know. For me, the last reference to the CLBR is 249, which is Saturninus and Navarchus of the Classis Britannica, which was found in Arles in the south of France, where he'd retired to. So it's last mentioned in 249. But if you have a look in the book, which is available on Kindle and everything as well, all the details and the chronology are in there. Great question.
But just briefly, why didn't they ever come back?
Across to the 3rd century. Too expensive.
Thank you. Okay. Carnia, sorry if I got that wrong, has asked, in my previous encounters with Severus, he has often been mentioned as a more negative figure in Roman political history. Do you believe that this is more of a modern interpretation?
I got asked this actually when I was leading a tour, and somebody said, "Why do you like him so much?" Because I don't paint it. I don't paint him in a good light at all. Actually, I just tell the hard truth. But he's a Roman emperor. He's living in the Roman world, so I try and judge him by the standards of his own day. He was a very militaristic emperor. He's one of the few Roman emperors who died in his own bed. He's a guy that put Roman North Africa on the map and took on the sort of the elites in Rome, etc., and then ruled on his own terms, champion of the Roman military, and I'm a military historian. And from a Roman perspective, he was a truly great emperor because he nearly always won, extended the Roman Empire to its greatest extent, had more legions than anybody else, ruled on his own terms for the whole time. So from a Roman perspective, he's one of the greatest emperors. He sort of ticks all the boxes for the, but what is, let's face it, a very militaristic martial empire. It's an empire.
Oh, thank you. Okay, Gordon Taylor asks, did Caracalla or Severus reoccupy Inchintal?
Antonine Wall. Oh, in Touch Hill.
Yes,
I'll
sorry.
tell you what. Well, I'll tell you what. Was that Gordon? Is it called Gordon?
Yes, Gordon
Gordon.
Taylor.
That's one of my favourite places to go. Actually, go to In Touch Hill. You stand in the middle of a very visible as crop marks Roman legionary fortress, the most northerly Roman legionary fortress in the Roman world. To my friends in Cass, built by Legio 20, Valeria Victrix during the campaigns of Agricola. Did it get rebuilt by Severus? No. However, nearby Arduk was reused by the Severans, and the Antonine Wall was also, at least the forts, brought back into operation to protect the rear of his campaigning forces as he moved up into the Upper Midland Valley. It's a great question, that is. One of my favourite places, mate.
Just in case I missaid it, I'm going to spell it for you, just so we know who we got.
Inch Tut Hill.
No, Inch, Intull.
Inch Tut Hill, trust me.
Okay, all right. Martin Besford has asked, is there any evidence of how they would have disposed of all the people who lost their lives after these two massive battles?
No, I mean, you can imagine basically looking for, in the archaeological records, looking for huge burial pits which haven't been found, which also haven't been found, by the way. I mean, if you look at the Roman campaigns in Britain, the three biggest were the 30,000 men of Agricola in Scotland in the late 1st century AD, earlier the 40,000 men in the Claudian invasion AD 43 into Kent, and later the campaigns of Severus at the beginning of the 3rd century, all of which would have created vast numbers of dead Roman and native, and we've got almost no evidence, probably because of the acidity of the soil where they were buried in the burial pits. By the way, where I'm in the Derbyshire Dales here, it's beautiful because it's alkaline soil. It's archaeologist paradise on a limestone plateau.
Nice. Paul Hayes, it's either Paul Hayes Rochester or Paul Hayes in Rochester, has said that he has two Septimian debased silver denarii. Sorry, my words are not coming out right tonight. I apologize to everyone for my terrible speaking. He asked, do you want to see them?
I'd love to see them. If you want to send me a picture of them, I'd absolutely love to see them. Thank you so much. That's really, really kind.
So at the top of the chat, you will see we have put a link into Simon's website where you can find his email address. And I'm sure if you send him an email, he would be very happy to see them or meet up with you somewhere to see them somewhere.
And also, to give you a book recommendation, not one of my own, Sam Moorhead's book, Roman Coins in Britain. So Sam Moorhead was in charge of the pass and Roman coins till recently in the British Museum, Sam Moorhead. And his book, Roman Coins in Britain, is an absolutely fantastic resource because it goes into a lot of detail about the variations on the various dynastic coins we find in Britain as well.
Cool. Thank you. Okay, so sorry, I was just looking down the questions. Martin Toy has said, I believe there's no confirmed date for London Wall. What evidence is there to assign it to Severus?
Coin evidence. It's coin evidence. It's in the can't remember where it is. It's fairly well established, though. It's based on coin data, and the coins in question were found very close to where the old Museum of London was on Aldersgate, which would have been where the wall joins the old Cripplegate Fort. Coin data, to answer your question.
Amazing. Okay, well, I think that is about all the questions, unless any more seep through. Thank you, Simon, so much. That was a really brilliant talk and really fascinating. And I bet everyone is desperate to go out and see Gladiator 2 right now and take their swords with them. Thank you, everybody, for attending. It was a really fascinating delve into the life of a Roman emperor in Britain. So, yeah, get out, watch Gladiator 2, watch Simon on Channel 5 at the Colosseum and soak in some more of it. As I mentioned earlier, if you're not a member of the society, please have a think about joining us. It works out about £3.30 a month, and you will receive a copy of our yearly journal, Archaeologia Cantiana, full of the most current historical archaeological research in the county. You'll also receive our biannual newsletters, exclusive access to our collections, conferences, and selected events, opportunities to get involved in excavations and research projects, and you will help us bring the benefits of Kentish history and heritage to everyone and continue to do these wonderful talks. Speaking of which, we have lots more coming up, so keep an eye out on our website for the upcoming talks. On the 5th of December, we have Randall Manor Revealed, Community Archaeology excavations in Shoreham Woods Country Park with Andrew Mayfield. The 23rd of January 2025, next year. Seems so far away, but also so close, frighteningly close. Dr. Reb Ellis-Hackham will be talking to us about animals and humans in the late Iron Age art of England and Wales, with special mention of Kent. 21st of February, David Brownrigg will bring us a presentation of technical aids in archaeology with a special focus on aerial and satellite imaging. On the 20th of March, Janice Thornton will be talking about Sheppey munitionesses, women in Sheerness Dockyard in World War I. And the 17th of April, 2025, Dr. Martin Watts will deliver his talk, Richborough, the Secret Port. So check the website for more details on these talks and all a wide range of events we have coming up and how to become a member. So leaves me to say thank you again, Simon, so much for your amazing talk. I look forward to seeing you very soon. Andy's just told me to not forget to check out the upcoming events on our website. I think that's and including an in-person event with Richard Taylor, Fellow of the Society of Antiquaries, and certain Dr. Simon Elliot, taking place at Maeatae Museum in early February.
The return.
So, yes. So thank you again. Thank you everyone for listening. Have a wonderful evening. We will see you all again here next month for another amazing talk. Cheers, guys. Thank you, Simon. Good night, everyone.
Cheers.